Hello, it's Ruby, and today I thought it might be interesting to think about how the story of Matilda criticises and casts light on the education system which we currently have. I'm so excited for us to start discussing this. I'm also very interested to hear your thoughts, whether you agree with me, whether there's anything in particular which I missed which you'd like to bring up. It's always interesting for us to have these discussions about the education system. Today's video is also very kindly sponsored by NordVPN, which is the fastest VPN server that you can use. In preparation for this video, I did want to re-watch Matilda the musical. I went to see it at the cinema with my family when it first came out, but unfortunately it's not on UK Netflix yet, but it is on American Netflix, so I just changed my VPN address to the US, and then I had a little movie night, re-watched the film, re-familiarised myself with it. It's honestly such an excellent film, and if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. NordVPN is an incredibly quick way to change your VPN address. So to watch the film, I just clicked on the little pin over the United States, and it was done, and I could just go onto Netflix as usual. And I just love how it is so easy. You can change to pretty much any country in the world, which is amazing, but also having a VPN address is a way to keep your data more secure, more private. If you have been looking to try a VPN server, then you can use my link nordvpn.com/Ruby, which will get you an extra 4 free months on top of the 2-year plan. And also, if you don't end up liking using it, then there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is really good. With that said, let's jump into thinking about Matilda the musical and the education system. So just to start, it's worth mentioning that Dahl was very critical of the education and school system. You might have read Boy Tales of Childhood. That was one of my favourite Dahl books when I was young, and it really casts this disjunct between the teachers at his school and the boys, the students. And this disjunct is nothing unusual and new in children's literature. It's something that Jacqueline Rose has written on. It's typical in books like Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland. The children are very separate from the adults. Often the adults aren't even given names. I especially think it's encapsulated in the Charlie and Lola books and TV show, where you never actually see their parents. However, despite Dahl's unhappiness at school, like he really didn't like school, Bingle notes that there is an over-reliance on Dahl in the primary school curricula, and lots of primary school teachers will read Roald Dahl aloud and recommend him. And of course, we still have adaptations like the new Matilda the musical, and it is useful, it's good, it's important for kids to have this awareness of good learning versus bad learning. Binaries aren't usually very helpful, but children's literature often does work in binaries. The story of Matilda gives us this grounding basis of this is what it means to learn in the right way, and this is kind of what it is to learn in the wrong way. Bingle has written this excellent paper which basically says that Matilda has really informed how we look at this imaginary teacher, this symbol, this figure of the teacher. Miss Honey is the prime, the excellent, the ideal teacher, and Miss Trunchbull is the complete opposite. And both of these characters are cast as absolutely different. I mean, if you look at Miss Honey and Miss Trunchbull in the illustrations, they look so different. In the new film, they look very different. The thing especially interesting is what they wear. Miss Honey has these beautiful floral dresses, and then Miss Trunchbull is wearing this green, very militant outfit. So we know that Miss Honey is a better teacher, and that's the whole point. Like, it's so clear. And also, just think about their names. Trunchbull versus Honey. I mean, you don't get more direct than that. Because of this disjunct between Miss Honey and Miss Trunchbull, everything that happens in Granger we assume to be bad teaching. We kind of distrust everything that Miss Trunchbull does in the education system. So obviously that is abuse through the chokey and her cruel and unusual punishment of making Bruce eat that entire chocolate cake. But also it's her reliance on rules and structure. When Miss Honey goes to Miss Trunchbull and asks if Matilda can be put in a higher year, she says, "An exception to the rules. In my school." She is absolutely livid at the prospect. But also the other thing is how she falls back on rote memorization. When she visits Matilda's class, she gets them to stand up and recite spellings, which is a very Victorian way of learning. So these are all things that we will discuss in today's video. And I'm sorry, I am actually going to switch outfits because I filmed half of this video already, and I'm just kind of adding in some extra bits so it flows a bit better. So in Matilda, Roald Dahl offers 2 different models of education. One is Matilda's. This is self-guided learning, which is led by interest and experience. And the second is the very rule-driven, structure-driven education model in school, which Miss Trunchbull offers. Now, one of the key things that defines Miss Trunchbull's bad education model is rote memorization. When she visits Miss Honey's class, she gets them to stand up and spell. Very traditionalist Victorian fashion. The Victorian education system was very much founded on recitation. There were certain poems and passages which children were expected to learn how to recite, and Lewis Carroll makes a joke of that in the Alice books. Isaac Watts wrote hymns and he wrote these moral poems, and one of them is "How doth the little busy bee?" And Alice changes this to "How doth the little crocodile?" And it's funny, and kind of it would have been funny because it was just one of those basic things that all children would have known how to recite. And that process of recitation is just very much shown through Miss Trunchbull. And the best contrast to this comes in the 1996 Danny DeVito film. The children are outside looking for the newt, and Matilda and Bruce have the book going, oh, what could it be? Is it a salamander? And they go, oh, it's a newt, and read from this book, teaching them about it. And it's some of the most engaging education that we get in the whole of the film. Danny DeVito in this moment is offering an alternative form of education, which is much more akin to kind of maybe like that system which Roosevelt champions, or the Rudolf Steiner schools, which is more practical led. We've also, because we've got Miss Trunchbull's method, but we've also got Matilda's genuine interest, genuine infatuation with learning, knowledge, reading. And next to this, the system which is championed at Trunchbull seems empty and silly. We've got this image of Matilda in the new film where she's lying on the grass with Miss Phelps, she's telling her stories. That she is learning so much more through this conversation, this fluid conversation, these books, than she would through Miss Trunchbull's recitation. And it was a really great decision to have the library being a travelling library, moving between locations, because it puts the library in complete opposition to Trunchbull. One is moving and transient and kind of situated in the real world, whereas the other is this block, which we even see in the very architecture of the building as well. And I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that the When I Grow Up song takes place outside of the school, which does reflect quite well in the musical actually as well, where you've got the swings, which make it very clear that they're outside of school. But the important thing here is that the things that they learn at Trunchbull are separate from their futures and what they want to do, and don't seem to have practical use, whereas Matilda's form of education is useful. So I think this is encapsulated best in the scene right before Amanda is thrown by the Trunchbull by her plats. She quickly tells the whole school to pile their blazers on top of Nigel because Nigel has been accused of putting treacle on Miss Trunchbull's seat. Then Matilda, very cleverly, she comes up with this excuse for Nigel, saying, oh, well, Nigel has narcolepsy and so he's been sleeping under these blazers for the last hour, which gets him out of trouble. That's her taking something she's learned, narcolepsy, and then applying it to the real world. And then compare that to, again, the spelling, which Miss Trunchbull tests the kids on when she comes into their classroom. The other important thing about Matilda is that she uses the real world to tell stories. Thus, she kind of stresses why literature is important. In the musical, they captured this really well through the story of the escapologist and the acrobat, which obviously isn't in the original story, but really gives Matilda this intelligence and this understanding of literature which we don't get in the book or the 1990s film. So for example, when Miss Trunchbull says a promise is a promise is a promise, that's then directly reflected when the evil aunt says a contract is a contract is a contract, using the same syntactical structure. And then you've obviously got her parents saying, well, if you're an escapologist, then I'm an acrobat, what with all of the cleaning and cooking I have to do. So she literally takes things that she sees in the real world and then she puts them into her stories. And so the film and the musical end up with this understanding of literature as a way of interpreting and understanding life. Other interesting thing, Matilda isn't an observer in this film. She is constantly just there watching, and she often stands apart or walks separately from her peers, encapsulated and climaxes in the song Quiet. And that focus on observation, that focus on looking at the world, is again kind of posited as this other form of education. Let's contrast that with the very highly structured model offered by Miss Trunchbull. So Miss Trunchbull's model is very structured, and very importantly, there are no exceptions to the rule. Miss Trunchbull says you need to keep your feet within the lines, and you've got this perpetual image of her as a hammer thrower. And that obsession with rules and structure is also seen in the CCTV cameras which Miss Trunchbull has. I just love this as a setting. I think it works so well, and it's so perfect for her character because it just shows how obsessive she is with this. The little control pad which she's using to move the CCTV cameras. I also think that Miss Trunchbull's obsession with the rules and sticking to the plan, this is the way that things work, this is the trajectory that people are supposed to take. Matilda can't move up a class because that's just not what's done. It's kind of like a mark scheme. And how we learn to follow mark schemes. We learn mark schemes, especially at GCSE, which can then progress us to the next stage. She says you have to stay inside your circle. That's literally mark schemes. It doesn't matter how much you know outside of it. It doesn't matter how well you understand it. It's literally, can you memorize it and can you put it down on the page? And so we know intuitively, as Ingle says, that this is not like this is bad education, this is like a bad form of education, and yet that's literally what the GCSE system is based on. But Matilda Wormwood as a character questions whether this is the right way to do things. She offers an alternative way of thinking about education and thinking about learning, which is really useful because it's easy to be a deconstructionist and criticise everything which is wrong with the system, but Matilda almost offers a new system which differs from what Trunchbull is currently doing. Matilda learns entirely for herself. Even before she's in an institution, she is learning through books, she's choosing what she reads, and then she's finding that she's following her interests and she's just learning. And obviously that's a utopian way of looking at it, because if we leave people to their own devices, we'll read the vast plethora of books that Matilda ends up reading. Maybe not, but it expresses a broader truth, which is that curiosity and leading with interest and giving children space and freedom within education is important. Miss Honey lets Matilda sit at the back, learn from books, and ask questions when she needs to. And actually maybe it's not as unrealistic as we think, because Alfie Kohn has written a fantastic essay which compiles a lot of the evidence and main research, but there is evidence to suggest that young people learn better and are more motivated when they're not working towards grades, when they don't have something external they're working towards, and instead they can focus on the material itself. Self-guided, self-directed learning leads to a fuller understanding of material, just like we see with Matilda. Miss Trunchbull deconstructs the education system, and Matilda offers this utopian new vision of what education could look like, what learning could look like. There are 5 main education models, and one of these is progressivism. This is a type of education which focuses on the child. The key thing that progressivism says is that education should prepare children for the real world. So it privileges shared planning of lessons and children just having that self-direction in their learning. Reconstructionism as an education model also says that education should just be about preparing kids for the world, and says that the goal of education is to lead change in society, to kind of help progress, help to improve human rights, etc. There are obviously many other benefits to education, to learning. If education is about preparing children for the real world, Miss Trunchbull's model does not do very well at this, because just look how Bruce Bogtrotter changes. So at the beginning, he is a vibrant character, he is rebellious, he thinks for himself, he literally calls Miss Trunchbull Agatha, and he's able to observe that Agatha doesn't like children being smart. So he's aware, he's reflective. But then after the cake and after her discipline and after being put in chokey, he becomes a minion of Miss Trunchbull. When he was eating the cake, he was triumphant. He was, you've got all of the children around him spurring him on. But then after chokey and after the discipline which Miss Trunchbull bestows, he is quiet and he just follows her. It's like that sense of originality is taken from the characters, is taken from Bruce. He's just following Miss Trunchbull. He's not thinking for himself anymore. Is that how we want children to turn out? No. No level of critical thinking. I know this is all obvious, but that's the point. We know that this isn't the right way to deal with children. We know that this isn't the right way to educate. We know that this isn't how we want our children to turn out. And yet, our current modern education system, especially GCSEs, does have some parallels with Trunchbull. It's not puritanical and structured and as intense as Trunchbull is. Trunchbull is very hyperbolic. However, there are some essential similarities, which maybe then are quite worrying when we look at them properly. Because the education system is not the utopian one offered by Matilda. When we watch that on screen, when we read about it, we know that that's kind of the model that we seek and that we want, and yet our system is very, very far from that. So despite respecting this education model in theory on the screen, in the book, in Matilda, the education system is built on very strict rules, very strict curricula because of the exam model. And yes, this does make some sense. There is value to having a curriculum. There are certain things that we want all children to learn about. There are certain things we want to make sure no children miss. And if you're going to have exams, then you need to have structure in place, you need to have rules in place just to make things fair. But, and this is something I've spoken about before, this model prevents us from fully engaging with the material because we are taught at GCSE level to pass exams. It's not skill-based, it's not content-based, it's not about understanding, it's about fulfilling an end. So education is not the end in itself, instead it's a means to an end, which Dewey is very critical of. Dewey says that education should not serve a pragmatic goal, but should instead be an intrinsic end in itself. And actually Matilda does an excellent job of showing the outcome of this progressivist model as well, because yes, she is intelligent, but she's also able to apply this intelligence, as we've seen, both through resolving justice but also through understanding the world. She uses literature and she uses education to understand the world better. Aside from that, Matilda importantly bridges this gap between adult and child, which we typically see as very distinct and separate in children's literature, as I talked about at the beginning of this video. Through Miss Honey and Miss Phelps, Matilda exists in this liminal space between the childhood world of her school friends and the adult world occupied by Miss Honey and Miss Phelps. This progressivist mode of teaching allows her to integrate herself within this world. So maybe to mention, Roald Dahl is also showing us the outcome of a progressivist model. If we let children take control of their education, they will integrate themselves within society, which also actually feels hypothetical. But Matilda alludes to this, and it's interesting that she does. Our education system today isn't either of these. It's not Miss Trunchbull's and it's not Matilda's. It exists somewhere in between. Matilda's model is utopian, and unfortunately I do think it would be impossible for us to actually put this into practice on a large scale. However, what's important is that as readers and as people, we respect this other model more, and we can see the value in this other model. And if we know this, as Bingle says, then why don't we try and replace it or reform what we already have? And thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. If you do want to watch Matilda the musical before it comes out on UK Netflix, then you can use a VPN server to watch it on US Netflix. As I say, there is a link in the description if you want to get a discount on that too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have more than a productive week.